Mr. Speaker.
Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and for our province. And in that work, give us strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the petition of the Board of Trustees of the Canadian Native Friendship Centre Building for the Board of Trustees of the Edmonton Canadian Native Friendship Centre Building Amendment Act 1986 be now read and received.
Does the Assembly agree with the motion by the Honourable Member for Drumheller? Opposed? Carried.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Speaker, I beg leave to table the annual report of the Westera Institute for 1984-85.
Introduction of special guests. Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I have a ministerial statement from March the 28th, 1985, a couple statements I want to make, and then quoting from there, and then ask the question. It has to do with Mr. Zerny talking about the Western Accord. And he says, as our Premier said at that time, we moved Ottawa out of our living room and onto the porch, and I am pleased to be able to report that with the support of our new federal government, Ottawa has moved off the porch. The federal government is meeting its commitment of the election campaign. The PGRT is being eliminated. I could go on. Very laudatory about the federal government. My question, Mr. Speaker, saying that we signed this wonderful accord, does the Premier now admit that this government's policies over the last year have caused the economic difficulties the province is facing, or is everything the fault of someone somewhere else?
He asked two questions there, Mr. Speaker, and the answer is no and no.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, no and no. So then the Premier would now admit from that answer that the Western Accord that we signed and that we asked for and we got has caused the economic problems that we're facing in this country. He said no. He said no.
Great.
Yep.
Next question.
No.
Next question.
Mr. Speaker, he asked if the Western Accord and our policies are a result of the economic difficulties facing the province. I said no.
Well, supplementary question then to the Premier. Flowing along that then, the Premier is saying that the Western Accord, which was signed by this government, has been the cause of the great economic revival that we've had in this province since that time.
Yeah, right.
Again, Mr. Speaker, if he's trying to draw a black and white line in some way, I don't agree with him. There are a variety of reasons that there are problems facing Alberta. One, of course, is the instability of energy prices on the international scene. The other is problems that our agriculture producers are facing with subsidies, both from the European Economic Community and from the United States. And, of course, other factors of oversupply in agricultural products. There's a variety of reasons, and we are working hard to try and help the people of Alberta through this period of time.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Premier. It's rather amusing that a year ago the federal government's great and now they're not so great. My question is this. A recent economic forecast by the World Bank predicts that in 1986-87, Alberta will have the slowest growth rate of any province in Canada. Has this sort of information about investor uncertainty given the government any reason to review its blind commitment to deregulation?
Mr. Speaker, there are all kinds of forecasts, and whether it's the Royal Bank or somebody, a corporation I have some familiarity with, or others. The fact of the matter is that the province of Alberta has in two of its vital areas of economic activity, one the field of energy and the other the field of agriculture, facing some problems brought on by circumstances beyond our borders. Nevertheless, we are working to try and counter those circumstances to help the people of Alberta. We will continue to do that.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Could he give the reasons now why this government went back to the Energy Accord? Could he give the reasons now why this government, when given the choice of throwing out either the floor price or the PGRT, they chose instead to throw out the floor price and keep the PGRT when they signed the accord?
There was no floor price in the NEP, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Little Bow.
To the Honourable Premier, I understand the Deputy Prime Minister was in Edmonton yesterday to have conversations relative to, I'm sure, the oil and gas industry. Does the Premier indicate whether progress has been made relative to discussions on the PGR specifically and other matters relative to the items raised by the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition?
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister was here to attend a meeting that we've been trying to set up for some period of time. It was a good meeting. We were able to discuss the problems facing Alberta, both in the agricultural area, some in transportation matters, others in the energy field. I find the Deputy Prime Minister an outstanding Albertan, very aware of the problems facing this province, and wanting to work closely with us to see if we can, on a cooperative basis, help Albertans with their problems. We did have a good discussion on energy matters and agreed very clearly that there was no linkage between the PGRT and Alberta royalties.
Second main question, Leader of the Official Opposition.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, at his meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, was the Premier able to take the opportunity to convey to him the deep discussions, the consensus that he had been able to reach with other Premiers of Canada and express those views to the Deputy Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, it was one of the things that we did discuss as well, because I wanted the Deputy Prime Minister to know that in his efforts to obtain national assistance for Alberta, that some considerable progress had already been made in that regard by the 10 premiers, agreeing that that national assistance was necessary. He was very pleased with that because obviously he, with a federal government, has to know that there is support throughout the country for national assistance. And he felt it was a major stride to have the premiers, particularly the premiers of Ontario and Quebec, advocating that kind of assistance. And he felt very good about that particular matter being accomplished at the Premier's Conference.
Main question,
Well,
Leader of the Opposition.
But again, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the separatists won't feel so good. But my question is to the Treasurer, if I may, Mr. Speaker. The prospect of a $5.5 billion deficit has startled many ordinary Albertans, although it doesn't seem to faze this government. But my question has to do in terms of revenues. What is the policy of the Treasurer on establishment of an all-party task force on tax reform, which could report before the spring 1987 session to the legislature?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, with respect to the
reference to the amendment to Bill 30, which allows the government to borrow the $5.5 billion. Let me be very clear that that is not an estimate of the deficit, and the Honourable Leader continues to cross the information with the facts, or the assumption with the facts. Be very sure that included in that is a very large potential between now and the end of '87 for the requirements of the province. With respect to tax reform, Mr. Speaker, again, it is enlightening to see the socialists start to talk about the need to disentangle and to correct the tax system of this country. It is a problem which has not been reviewed in any great way since approximately 1971, and this province this government has always urged and underscored the need to have a substantial amount of reform in the tax system, to do two things. First of all, to ease the burden on the middle income and low income earner in this province, but secondly, to ensure that the rewards are there so that investment, when it takes place, does have a larger marginal return to the investor, and therefore to trigger the kinds of economic growth which this province has been characterized by. And of course, it has been this government's policy all along. In fact, it has been the model for some time in Canada to ensure that the average tax rates in this province are low, and therefore the disposable income earned by the wage earner and by others in this province is protected. And we have done that in a variety of ways, and the facts are clear. I don't have to echo again the fact that Alberta does have the lowest marginal and average tax of any province in Canada. As to the tax reform itself, Mr. Speaker, I do believe that there is some merit in this province following the initiatives laid down by the federal government, one which has just been criticized by the honourable member from Norwood, that we do in fact would like to see the shape of the tax reform recommendations which Mr. Wilson is suggesting. Now, it would be easy to say that we could simply follow the American precedent which the Conservative government in the United States and Mr. Regan is now going to implement, and that we could in fact take some selective suggestions from that recommendations in terms of shrinking the brackets or in terms of reducing some of the tax shelters, and I think that would be a commendable recommendation. But before we decide, Mr. Speaker, about the government's position, I think we'd have to see and have an ample opportunity to discuss with the federal government just how fully they intend to embark upon a tax reform. It should be known that
the Chair appreciates the ability of the Minister to foresee some of the eventual supplementaries. Leader of the Opposition.
I thought I asked about a task force, but I'll have to go back and check, Mr. Speaker. But I might point out he's talked about rewards. Yes, we have rewards for the rich in this province. Over the last 5 fiscal years, corporations in the province paid only 14% of income taxes, while individuals paid 86%, and that's gone up since this government. My question, other than the talk, what specifically is the government prepared to do to try to shift the balance back to the corporations as the Americans are doing now?
well, of course, Mr. Speaker, the member is, of course, faulty on his analysis as usual with respect to the tax system, and there's no doubt that he's never had to deal with the investment side and therefore does not understand how the reward system works. Let me go on to say that there is no doubt that we have, through the initiatives of this government, by putting in place our own corporate income tax, been able to target certain objectives which the members opposed have talked about. The need to target certain industries to stimulate some kinds of economic activity and to find reasons to stimulate jobs in this province. And we have used the tax system to do just that, Mr. Speaker. In particular, we have used the corporate tax system to engender those kinds of rewards to the private sector, the risk takers, who very seldom support that party. And to go on, Mr. Speaker, let me say that if you start to tax the corporations at too high a marginal rate, of course those tax costs are passed on to the consumer one way or another. And I think it's a bit of a myth to suggest that there is an unloading of taxes onto the individuals in this province, because I've already stated, Mr. Speaker, the personal tax rate in this province is the lowest in Canada, if not in North America. The fact that there is no sales tax and a variety of other marginal tax does one particular thing: protects the disposable income or the after-tax income of the citizen in this province. All Albertans, all Canadians are aware of it, and they would like to be here, and they'll be here soon with their investment dollars.
Everything's
Our version of Robin Hood, you know, rob from the poor and give to the rich. My question, though, has to do, falling back, he talked about this conservative government, and he might point out, with the help of the Liberal Democrats, that the U.S. tax reform includes a 21% minimum tax on corporations and a closure of numerous loopholes. My question is, do you want to ask it, honourable member? You know, what would the backbenchers do if they couldn't yell question in the House? You know? My question is, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer. The previous Treasurer was opposed to the concept of a minimum tax. What is the position of this Treasurer on the concept of a minimum provincial tax?
Mr. Speaker, when you start getting into specifics about tax, it's going to take some time to unwind and to come to a conclusion. And if the honourable member wants to trigger those kinds of questions, I'd be glad to take the time to unravel for him and explain to him how this tax system does work in this province and across Canada. Let me come back to the original point rather than to provoke debate, because I would never want to do that. We are looking at a variety of ways, Mr. Speaker, to add to the federal discussion on tax reform. One of the recommendations, which the member says is an all-party task force. We have in this province, in this government, over the past 3 years, as a consequence of the white paper, had a special committee at work dealing with the personal income tax system and the corporate income tax system. We would like to see just how determined Mr. Wilson is, the federal government in particular, to move towards some form of tax reform. And until I see the shape of his initiatives and see how fully involved they will be in terms of our own provincial legislation, be it on personal and corporate tax, then it would be difficult for me to agree to the recommendation. However, I must say, at the margin, talking in tax terms, there is some merit to the member's recommendation.
Gee. Yes. I feel quite humble, you know. He actually agrees with me on something. But my question is, flowing from the minister's answers, why is it that we have to wait for Mr. Wilson? Surely we could be looking into tax reform in our own provincial portion. Why is it that we do have to wait till Mr. Wilson gets around to it?
There again, Mr. Speaker, the member should go back and look at the record of the events as the tax system has unfolded. Time and time again, this government has taken the lead in terms of tax reform. We have argued vociferously that at some points and sometimes it's necessary for us to have economic levers available to the government so we can stimulate activity, and we did that by bringing back our own corporate tax system to this province. That was not following any other federal government lead. But with respect to the reality of the personal corporate tax system, it is well known that in the case of the province of Alberta, we are essentially involved with the federal legislation. And in fact, I'll be bringing forth the legislation probably next week, which will be the Alberta Personal Corporate Tax Amendment Act. And in that legislation, there will be a series of acts, amendments at least, which will follow or replicate or be a result of federal initiatives. We work essentially under the federal legislation, and therefore, until we can see how the federal changes are going to impact on what we want to achieve here in this province by our variety of economic policies and our vision as to what needs to be achieved, then of course we cannot really react until we see it fully. I should go on to say that there are a series of meetings with the various finance ministers scheduled for this fall, and the essence of that discussion will in fact be what is the measure of tax reform, how will the provinces participate, what kind of initiatives need to be shown in the federal legislation, and of course, until we see that, I think it would be foolish for us to recommend any policy until we know exactly what it is that the federal government wants to achieve. That's the way we operate. We don't go out in front. We don't drive red herrings across the trail. We act in a very sound management position in this government.
Member for Little Bull.
Provincial Treasurer has had a very nice sleep last night. Congratulate him. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Provincial Treasurer. The Canadian Real Estate Association and last evening the Alberta Real Estate Association made a strong presentation to us against a federal business transfer tax. Could the minister indicate Alberta's position relative to that tax and what presentation will be made to the federal government on that matter?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I have to some extent spoke on that point and other question periods with respect to the business transfer tax. It is my impression that the federal government is attempting to defer implementation of that tax, although there was a suggestion that Mr. Wilson would bring forward a green paper approximately this time this year to provide some discussion points for all governments to look at. Obviously, in the case of Alberta, we want to be very careful about an introduction of a federal business transfer tax. There are certain sectors in our province which could be affected by that tax, but again, until we see the shape of their policy, it's very difficult to react. We don't want to stab in the dark. We want to have clear positions, as we have always done, and we will either add substantially to the discussion or clearly present the government's position. But again, until we see the design of their policy, it's very difficult for us to react.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, in view of his statement that he'd like to keep money in the hands of the consumer to keep the economy rolling, could he explain why his government just a couple budgets ago increased the personal income tax 13%? What was the reasoning then?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on one hand, the member from Sturgeon talks about the size of the deficit. On the other hand, he's suggesting tax reform. Well, you know that the federal Liberal Party was the most profligate spenders, the worst taxers in the world. And if that's the policy he wants us to emulate, then get up and say it.
Supplementary, Calgary McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Treasurer, is it not true that the percent of income tax provincially is less today than, in fact, it was in 1975?
Speaker, the member makes a very valid point. As I've said before, a very, very sound question, based on information, based on good research, contrary to other questions. It is true, Mr. Speaker, that first of all, Alberta does have the lowest tax regime in North America, as I've indicated. Secondly, it has a vast opportunity in terms of tax room. And moreover, in terms of nominal dollars versus real dollars, of course, the tax load on the consumer in the province of Alberta is, in fact, again, lowest, as the point the member made. But you just have to look at the makeup of the Alberta economy to see how powerful the tax regime can be. And clearly, if you look at the consumer expenditures in this province, the expenditures per capita in Alberta are the highest of any province in Canada, and there's one good reason for that, and that, in fact, is we're protecting the disposable income of the consumer in this province, the wage earner, and we are allowing them to get the money back into the economy, and that's why the consumer expenditures are highest in Alberta than any other province in Canada.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Minister of Energy. The energy industry is certainly in a serious state of decline, and this condition is amplified by disagreement and confusion between the federal and provincial governments. Furthermore, industry is suffering from a lack of clear direction. Now, and as policies of provincial government, a clear indication, I believe, of the minister's incompetence. Can the minister confirm that his meeting last week with his federal counterpart was scheduled only after the minister learned through a newspaper announcement that Marcel Mass would be in Calgary?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that there are those out there judging the competence of all of us. And we won't, and we would suggest the honourable member not point fingers. Otherwise, fingers might move in his direction. However, in terms of our discussions with the federal government, our office had been working with the Office of the Federal Minister of Energy to arrange a meeting, and we were able to do so last week. And I've subsequently had discussions with the federal minister and feel that we are making considerable progress. We laid before the federal minister a proposal. Our officials are working on that proposal, and we feel very confident that we are making good progress and will be able to come up with a package in the near future to assist the industry in this country.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I guess he did only find out through the newspapers. While the Premier now alleges that the communications problems between his government and the federal Tories are due to language problems, isn't the real problem the federal government's disregard of the Alberta government? For example, Prime Minister not returning the Premier's phone calls and the Federal Minister of Energy not communicating with Mr. Weber. Isn't that the real reason?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to respond to the honourable member that he has completely misled the House. There has not been one time that I have phoned the Prime Minister that he hasn't returned my call. And that kind of distortion or misleading, I think, should not be presented in the legislature.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I wasn't talking about getting the Prime Minister's answering machine. I was talking about getting the Prime Minister's himself. Can the Minister confirm? Can the Minister... Quiet down, fellas. Sounds like the Calgary Zoo. Back to the Minister, then. Can the Minister confirm that there are no longer any federal conditions to the removal of the PGRT in light of the Deputy Prime Minister's statement that removal of the petroleum gas revenue tax, Mr. Speaker, is not linked to provincial royalty cuts?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we made it very clear to the Honourable Federal Energy Minister, and subsequently when questions were asked in this House, there's no way that we would be tying our responsibilities for royalties to any removal of PGRT, that was something completely separate, something that we expect to come off soon. Royalties are our economic rent as owners of the resource, and we are considering proposals from the industry, and we'll work with them to see what we can do. There are a number of factors that we'll be looking at to see how we can help the industry out of the current situation of today.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. Now, is the federal government's reluctance, if all these things have disappeared, all standing in the way, is the reluctance to remove the petroleum gas revenue tax due to the fact that this government has no plans whatsoever what to do with the $600 or $700 million which will be freed in Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I understand this question, it's misdirected. If the PGRT is removed, then it would be the industry receiving the revenues or the monies for that, and the industries in this country have demonstrated in the past an excellent record in terms of their reinvestment, and we don't see any reason why they shouldn't do it in the future.
Okay, supplementary.
To the Honourable Minister, in terms of the presentation to Ottawa, could the Minister indicate what consensus or agreement or coordination has occurred with other Western provinces in terms of the Alberta proposal or the Western Canadian proposal to Ottawa?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the Western Accord and the natural gas pricing agreement, those were agreements with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, and we are working very closely with those provinces. I've recently met with the minister from Saskatchewan. Officials have been meeting, and there's excellent cooperation between Alberta and those provinces, and we will be working together with the federal government to further our discussions because all three provinces are affected by the results.
Supplementary question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that the federal government wants to push ahead with the November 1st date for gas deregulation, which would further hurt our economy. Has the minister at least pressed the federal government to, say, ask for a year's moratorium or a year's delay on this agreement at this time?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we are being much more responsible than just to indicate that we want delays and delays. What we are trying to do is resolve the concerns of the industry. It is our objective to try to remove the barriers, remove the concerns that the industry have, and be able to proceed. Is an date that is an objective we're working for. However, in the subsequent weeks, we'll be working with Saskatchewan and British Columbia as well on those. But it's still our position that if we can resolve all those concerns, then we will proceed November the 1st.
Main question, Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Lands and Wildlife. soon, or as of now, the ducks in southern Alberta are starting to fly into the crops. And I was wondering if the minister is, you're right, and I'm sure the Premier would enjoy a few days there as well. If the minister could indicate whether the terms of reference for the Wildlife Damage Fund are going to be changed for this fall's potential compensation.
No, Mr. Speaker, I don't feel there be time this fall to make any changes to the fund. I would like to refer the member, though, to the Hail and Crop Review Committee that is being undertaken this summer and fall and headed by Dallas Schmidt, and we are discussing that crop damage fund in light of the hail and crop review that's going on.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister. Could the minister indicate whether one of the items of discussion would be a differentiation in terms of compensation between irrigated lands or irrigated crops and dryland crops?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that is one of the points of discussion that, and I will be making that point to that review committee. I've had discussion with irrigation districts in southern Alberta, and input costs on crops in irrigation versus dry land are about double, and basically the $75 per acre, which is a top on the fund, is not sufficient to look at the input costs in irrigation areas.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the minister. In a number of the areas of the province, and specifically southern Alberta, Ducks Unlimited have placed feeding stations in various places to divert the ducks' attention from the crops. Could the minister indicate whether the plan would be coordinated with Ducks Unlimited and in terms of compensation?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have quite a number. We have some 20 projects going on throughout the province with Ducks Unlimited, and we're looking at habitat enhancement throughout the province. And each location, plans are definitely underway to look at the crop damage problems that the increased habitat creates. Lure stations, bait stations, that type of thing are part of the operational plan, but very definitely we've got to confirm to the farmers and ranchers in the area that the damages will be looked after if we increase those damages. And I urge all members to discuss this with their in the farm communities and make sure presentations are made to the Hail and Crop Review Committee that's going around the province. It's a very important item. Wildlife damage in this province has basically been paid for on a 50-50 basis with the federal government. Our 50% that we spend comes from the hunting permits. $6 and a certificate goes into the fund. Last year, that fund only supplied enough for one half of the costs. We had a lot of damage this spring, and we definitely do have to review the whole funding of wildlife damage, and not just to do with up on birds and game. We have to look at all types of deer damage and other types of wildlife damage that is being created. The devastation in southern Alberta with the drought the last 2 years very definitely brought to light the necessity of looking at wildlife damage.
Final supplementary.
To the minister, could the minister indicate whether recommendations will be available for the spring session of 1987 and also in coordination with the 1987-88 fiscal budget?
My colleague, the Associate Minister of Agriculture, may want to supplement, but my understanding is that the review is taking place this fall and the report should be in late this fall. I don't know the exact timing.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. He suggested in my contacts with farmers in wildlife damage, I've met with some farmers, and I wonder if the minister could clarify. They claim that when push comes to shove between Ducks Unlimited and the farmer as to who has the rights to the water, the Ducks Unlimited have been winning. Can he tell me whether priority lies with the farmer or what does lie with Ducks Unlimited when it comes to the use of the water?
The ducks lose.
If I had my way, I guess we'd have to say they both should win, and they can. Very definitely, no projects go forward without the cooperation of the farmers in the area. We've never gone into an area where we've had to expropriate land or anything like it. Projects have been delayed because of concerns locally, and it's very important that we have the insurance fund reviewed to make sure that if there is damage, that we're going to be looking after it.
Member for
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps to the Associate Minister of Agriculture in regards to the review of the hail and crop insurance program. Could the Associate Minister explain why the major hearings for this review are scheduled during the first 2 weeks of September, when farmers will be largely unable and unwilling to participate in the hearings?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to answer that question. My understanding is that the hearings will be all over the province. There are 40 hearings scheduled for areas throughout the province, so they can't possibly be held all in September. In fact, what's going to happen, the hearings are scheduled to start in southern Alberta, presumably after they're finished the harvest, and move north as the other areas are finished harvest. So the hearings will go on into December and possibly even the first of the year, but December for sure.
Member for Calgary North Hill, followed by the member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Labour, and it concerns the Labour Relations Review Committee. And though I understand that one member has now been replaced, will the resignations of the members of the committee result in any delay in the committee getting at its work?
Mr. Speaker, I don't anticipate any delay. The first meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday of the committee. Mr. Kelly, who has been appointed to replace Mr. Leclerc, who expressed much regret at resigning, Mr. Kelly may not be able to rearrange his schedule to fit for the next Tuesday meeting, but that meeting will go ahead as scheduled. I intend to have another meeting perhaps some 10 days later. At next Tuesday's meeting, we'll be presenting the members of the committee with the briefing material that I've been going over and giving them some 10 days to go over that before the next meeting.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister advise us when the other replacement may be named?
Mr. Speaker, I have not as yet had any resignation from any other member of the committee formally. All I have is very indefinite reports from third parties that Mr. Murray may be resigning from the committee, but I've had no confirmation of that. I do, however, have a replacement available if that resignation comes forward.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister in a position as yet to advise us when the schedule of the committee's work with respect to when public hearings will be held, when briefs will be received, etc.?
Perhaps I can add to the statement I made in the House on the 1st of August. In that statement, I indicated that the committee would be reviewing legislation in other jurisdictions. That's the process that will occur at the meeting of next Tuesday and perhaps some 10 days later. Subsequent to that, it is the intention to have the committee travel to and meet with labour, management and government representatives in other jurisdictions. A firm decision has now been made to visit at least West Germany, Britain and Washington, D.C. Because we have some elements that are available to us in those other jurisdictions which are not currently incorporated in Alberta legislation. After the visits to other jurisdictions, it's the intention to submit to Albertans in a broad base, perhaps some 2,500 organizations, an interim report that will lay before them other concepts that we may find and that the committee, and I mean the committee, not myself, that the committee may feel can usefully be incorporated in Alberta legislation. I would suggest that in the interim, any individual or organization who wishes to may start considering their experience with the current legislation and any proposals that they may wish to make. But before submitting written submissions, I would suggest that they look at that interim report because it may raise issues that they may wish to address. We're not going to hold public hearings. We're going to hold public meetings around the province. The intention is to have them somewhat less formal than public hearings, so that individuals and others will be willing to come and express their opinions freely at those meetings. The eventual schedule is, as I said before, intended to approach legislation in the spring of 1987.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona, supplementary. Member for St. Albert.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. No, I think it's just great that we're going to go on a world tour. I think the Minister could probably stop in at a building trades office, any office, in Edmonton, in the province of Alberta. My supplementary question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is does the Minister intend on contacting the Alberta Federation of Labour to have that umbrella organization place somebody on this Labour Review Committee and stop playing games with Labour?
Mr. Speaker, I object to the inference that I'm playing games with Labour. What I have started into is a very sincere attempt to respond to statements made by the Premier since he became Premier of the province, by myself since I became Minister of Labour, and the statement in the throne speech of June the 12th. This is an open committee. The people who have been appointed to it have been appointed because of their individual characteristics. There is a fair representation, 3 from Labour, 3 from management, and 3 from the general public. The people who have been appointed, in regard to the interruption about 2 to 1, I would say to the member from Calgary who made it that the Labour statutes of this province apply to everybody in this province, all employees, all employers, and to the general public. The representation is fair and it is even. The process will be open throughout. The aim is to develop legislation, if there are any changes needed, that will be fair and reasonable to all Albertans, employees, employers, and the general public alike. That is what we are going to proceed with, and I anticipate that the result will fulfill the commitment of the throne speech of June the 12th.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. How can he possibly say it is fair when he has not asked the leader of the largest labour organization in the province for their recommendation? How can he possibly say it's fair?
I'm delighted to give the honourable member from West Loch Sturgeon the answer. The reason is that the people have been selected as individuals. They are not representatives of those from whom they come. The 3 members from Labour will represent the broad aspects of organised labour. They will be there to address the issues of all employees, especially in the organised sector. I did not approach any employer groups, chambers of commerce, construction owners associations, nor the construction companies. And on that basis, we did not approach any labour organisations specifically as individuals.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. There are too many interruptions in disregard of Standing Order 13. The member for Edmonton Strathcona, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Solicitor General. In view of the deaths and serious injuries that have occurred for many years at the hands of suspended drivers who have been able to get their licenses in their own names and avoid detection thereby because the relevant systems in Alberta and other provinces didn't show them to be suspended, and in view of the recent disclosures that, contrary to earlier impressions, all pertinent information has nonetheless been available to police computers at least since 1981 in Alberta, what steps is the Solicitor General taking to discover the people or mismanagement in his department or elsewhere that have permitted such a state of disorganization, and will he be taking appropriate action?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly welcome the question for the member, from the member for Strathcona. However, I believe that in the past question periods I have specifically addressed those concerns. First of all, I'd like to indicate that I have the utmost confidence in the staff in the Motor Vehicles Division as well as the police in this province. There have obviously been occasions where suspended drivers have not been apprehended. That's an unfortunate circumstance. We have initiated an in-depth study to close off any openings that are discovered in our paperwork processing. I have also indicated to the House that we have the Suspended Driver Apprehension Program, which is being initiated in our department in conjunction with the police forces effective September 1st. This system will allow detection of suspended drivers after another infraction, at which time the police will be able to incarcerate and prosecute these people for suspended drivers. There's many situations where people want to defy the law and drive while suspended. We're working at our utmost to remove them from the road.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister said he has the utmost confidence in the staff, having regard, Mr. Speaker, to the major foul-ups disclosed recently, 1979 incorrect annual report, resuspended drivers interfacing, 1981 onwards, lack of use of the interfacing capacity, 1982 onwards, chaos in the accounting end of the computer, and last Friday, Mr. Speaker, very misleading information supplied by the department to the Minister. Will the Minister, having regard to the fact that the two assistant deputy ministers responsible and some other staff have remained the same throughout, not agree it is time for a major shake-up in the department?
Mr. Speaker, the apparent or alleged inaccuracies in the annual reports I addressed recently as being a little over-enthusiastic by our department, that in fact the technical side would be able to result in interfacing quicker than in fact it did happen. That's unfortunate. The reports didn't follow along with the technical ability. Unfortunately, I think the member should realize that that's water under the bridge, and in fact definite and strong action is being taken.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister then, what extra information is to be provided the police computer from the 1st September onwards, as he says, i.e. information it wasn't supposed to have been getting all along, at least since 1981?
Mr. Speaker, the member is again indicating befuddled thought process. I indicated that the program that will be coming into effect in September the 1st is a new program. This is a program whereby our department will be advising the police force of suspended drivers incurring subsequent infractions with the law. In the past, there was interface if, in fact, the police had the time or the capacity in the computer to do a direct check. That isn't available. There are incidences, and unfortunately too many, whereby that time is not allowable to the police officer on the street. This will encourage the suspended driver to stay off the road because there is a definite apprehension program in effect.
The time for order, please. Time for question period has expired. Does the Assembly agree to the completion of this complete set of questions? Opposed? Carried.
I'm much obliged, Mr. Speaker. But then, Mr. Speaker, if I can ask the Minister, what is the explanation for the malfunctioning from 1981 onwards of the systems which allowed cases like Mr. Konkolis's case last week to occur?
Mr. Speaker, in the specific case of Mr. Konkolis, the impaired or the driving while suspended occurrences were because he had licenses from other provinces. That is also a part of the study, and in fact the failure of the system from 1981 onward comes mainly from about three situations. Quite often the police stop or apprehend people and don't have the time to check licenses through the CPIC, which interfaces with our Motor Vehicle Division computer. If it's in a radar trap and they've got 10, 20 people aside. The time that it takes to check each one, there's great unrest among the people that have been stopped by the side of the road. Unfortunately, at times, there's technical malfunctions and the computer is down. The police force uses the CPIC, Canadian Police Information Centre computer for various other criminal activities besides traffic offenses. Those particular things compounded result in not as many people being checked as possible. We are now also, as part of this study, trying to initiate programs that will overcome this. And although the member is trying to make give a higher profile to the incident of suspended drivers being on the road, I believe this Assembly and the public are more than well aware of that. And I think now they should be more than well aware of the intensive study that we're undertaking, and that we as a government think that it is a problem and we are trying to overcome it.
Supplementary, member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, will the minister agree that the problems we're facing are less those of the civil service than a reflection of a lack of political will for many years on the part of this government to deal with the problems of impaired driving and suspended drivers?
Mr. Speaker, it's on rare occasion that I disagree with the honourable member for Buffalo vocally. This is one occasion I'd like to say that I think he's totally in error. We have taken strong action against suspended drivers. This particular incident has arisen. It's get a little more high profile, and fortunately it has, because I think it's given the public an indication that it's the public that has to stop the suspended drivers, not just the government. We are taking strong initiative to try and stop this, but I think it's the public that also has to be aware if their neighbor doesn't have a license, tell us about it.
Orders of the day. The chair understands there's a request for unanimous consent with regard to a particular motion.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to request a unanimous consent to move the following motion under Standing Order number 40. The pages we distributed.
You've got to read it.
Yeah.
Read it.
Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly express clearly its opposition to and abhorrence of racist groups such as the Aryan nations. Be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly affirm that people of all races, religions, and colors are and will continue to be welcome in Alberta as equals and are entitled to be treated with dignity and respect as human beings. Be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge each Albertan to fight discrimination and intolerance on a daily basis wherever it is found.
Is there unanimous consent for the consideration of this motion? Opposed? Consent has been given by the House. Distribution of the motion, please take place.
Speak to it while it's being distributed. The Liberal Party, in presenting this motion today, is because it believes that elected representatives of our community should speak out clearly, forcefully, and on a timely basis when racist groups such as the Aryan nations appear on the scene and grab the public spotlight. By passing this motion, the members of this legislature demonstrate to the people of the province, and indeed the world, that we stand united in opposition to and abhorrence of racist groups of this nature. We also say unequivocally that people of all races and religions and colors are and will continue to be welcome in Alberta as equals, and that they are entitled to be treated with dignity and respect as human beings. We are a multicultural and multi-religious community, and we are much the richer for this wonderful diversity. Now, as a lifelong Albertan, I know the people of this province well, and I know that the values which we are expressing here today reflect the near unanimous attitude of tolerance and understanding of our citizens. There will always be a few fringe bigots in any community. The task is to maintain a social climate which is not receptive to their growth. Our job as legislators is to provide leadership and to speak out clearly on the issues and to provide policies for the future. But each citizen has an important role to play, and accordingly, we urge each Albertan to fight discrimination and intolerance on a daily basis wherever it is found.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak briefly to support the motion of the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon. Perhaps some perspective is needed, Mr. Speaker, in issues of this type. People in the Assembly and elsewhere in positions of leadership in the community should always, at all times, speak out against hatred and discrimination and all of the things that undercut and impair our society. I believe that strongly, and the balance that is required would be that hopefully, and declaring this by the Assembly today, we won't, by that act, further advertise and give some further prominence to this type of cheap and insidious movement. The members of the Assembly, some of whom are younger than I, but many of whom are not, would remember as small children, those who are of my age, listening to the progress of World War II. And that was an occasion, Mr. Speaker, for anybody who is of that age, that the memories of that and the banding together of the peoples, really, of the world to fight hatred was a very moving time. It appears we must still fight hatred, and I think it important that we do so. I have the wish that having made this declaration today, that this outfit will sort of go away. As Attorney General for some years, I was, I suppose, privileged to know something of the basis upon which the similar organizations operate in this province. The fact is that the numbers of people involved are so minuscule that it cannot be taken as a indication, the existence of something like this cannot be taken as an indication of the views or feeling of really our people in any way at all. And that perhaps does not even need emphasis, because I think we all know that. And those who are misguided enough to believe in hatred and discrimination fly in the face of the legislation of this country and this province, in the sense of the Bill of Rights of Alberta, the Individuals' Rights Protection Act, and the Constitution of our country. Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude, and I hope honourable members would agree that at the same time as the Assembly makes a declaration of this type, that it is suitable that the government of the day also have its policy as part of the declaration of the Assembly, because the government of the day, of course, has the responsibility on a day-by-day basis to administer the justice system and to provide all protection to the citizens of our province from encroachments of this type. I want to move an amendment to the motion which I believe reinforces and supports the proposition I've just made, that the government of the day should also make a declaration. And before reading it, Mr. Speaker, I note that reports from the area involved of a meeting last night show that the people there don't approve either. And I would therefore move the following amendment. It incorporates the key words of the last paragraph of the honourable member's motion, but it would withdraw the last paragraph and restate it in this way. Be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly endorses and supports the position of the Government of Alberta in opposing the aims and objectives of the Aryan nations as declared in the Assembly by the Attorney General on August 7, 1986, and urges each Albertan to fight discrimination and intolerance on a daily basis wherever it is found.
Perhaps, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, we might wait until all copies of the amendment are distributed, and then the Chair will recognize later the representative party. Please proceed. Chair wishes he knew.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity for delay, but I believe I can speak wholeheartedly in support of the amendment and as well as the motion before us this morning, and wish to speak on behalf of not only myself but my colleague in the representative party. I want to say three things. First of all, issue our support. Secondly, say that what we are actually doing here this morning is affirming and reaffirming the ground rules for Alberta society and what we believe as Albertans and what we will not tolerate. And that's very important for us to do that as legislators. Often we allow our value system to evolve without any leadership or any kind of direction. And I think what we're doing this morning is placing it on paper, placing it before Albertans as to what we believe and the direction we want for Alberta society. The third thing I would like to say is that very clearly in my remarks that we this morning are issuing notice that we are not prepared in any way to accept discrimination or intolerance in this province. And I think that's to our credit as legislators and certainly a credit to the Alberta legislature here today, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to support the amendment which is in front of the members. First of all, I would like to point out that it was on that day, August 7th, 1986, when the Attorney General made the comments implied in this motion that he was responding to questions as posed by the New Democrats, the official opposition, in which I think a mutual concern was shared. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, given the amendment and its broad implications with respect to fighting discrimination and intolerance, I would like to point out that the people of Caroline themselves last night, I believe, exercised the most powerful pressure they can possibly, that is peer pressure, by holding a larger than expected public meeting on the matter of the organizing of this fringe group called the Aryan Nations. It's okay.
Seems to be some concern at the Assembly that there's a bit of noise in the galleries, and perhaps the Sergeant-at-Arms would keep an eye on that and call order if it's indeed required. The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to point out that it is my political experience that one cannot completely outlaw all forms of hatred and intolerance, peer pressure, and support and leadership from members of the Legislative Assembly, standing as they do as community leaders, are the effective way to encourage people to think twice about their levels of intolerance or prejudice. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Municipal Affairs noted that the numbers in this instance may be minuscule, and he hopes that they go away. I think that sentiment is shared by all members. However, Mr. Speaker, one cannot understate that they may be minuscule at this time, but all sorts of rump movements in the history of human development have turned into major catastrophes. I personally have witnessed a small group turn into a large group, namely the National Front in Britain. And what has made a difference is that community leaders themselves have spoken out strongly against the principles on which such organizations operate. Community people themselves organize to discourage, not by letter of the law, but by peer pressure and by an understanding of what it is to be part of humanity, and have been successful in so fighting. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I support not only the amendment on behalf of my caucus, but also the motion.
With respect to the amendment, Honourable.
The thought I was closing off was to thank everyone, and but we should be on the amendment, you know.
Chair appreciates the acceptance of direction. There seems to be indeed a willingness to call the question with regard to the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. The chair recognizes that the amendment carried unanimously. May the mover of the motion as amended conclude debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all members of the House. As it often happens in a democracy, everything works out, I guess, or each of us can take some credit. Liberals propose it, the Conservatives amend it, the NDP take credit for bringing it up in the first place. So we're all, and the reps made a stirring speech to confirm what we all believe. So I want to thank the House very much, and that will go with the credit.
All those in favour of the motion as amended, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Let the record show that the motion as amended carried unanimously.
Committee of Supply.